Imagine walking into your favorite store, eyeing a new smartphone or a bottle of imported wine and deciding to make a purchase. You've budgeted for it, you're ready to pay, but suddenly, the price tag is much higher than you expected. That's because the government has just imposed a hefty tax, effectively doubling the cost of that product overnight. This isn't just a small fee, it's a dramatic increase that can make everyday items feel out of reach for many people. This is what happens when a 100% tariff is put in place. A tariff is essentially a tax on goods brought in from other countries, and it can have a huge impact on prices and availability. Governments use tariffs for several reasons: to protect local businesses from foreign competition, to generate revenue, or as a tool in international disputes. Sometimes, tariffs are used as leverage in trade negotiations, or as a way to retaliate against what a country sees as unfair practices by others. On July 28, 2025, China sent shockwaves through the global economy by announcing a sweeping 100% tariff on a range of goods imported from the European Union and South Korea. This announcement came suddenly, catching many businesses and governments off guard. For Chinese consumers, this means that imported cars, luxury items, and even everyday products from Europe and Korea will now cost twice as much as they did just a day before. The impact is immediate and significant, affecting both shoppers and retailers across the country. This isn't just a minor disagreement between trading partners. China's move is a bold and deliberate action, signaling a major shift in the rules of global trade. It's a clear message that China is willing to take strong measures to defend its interests. According to Chinese officials, these tariffs are a direct response to what they describe as unfair trade practices by the EU and South Korea. They argue that these measures are necessary to protect Chinese industries and workers from foreign competition that they believe is not playing by the rules. By specifically targeting Europe and Korea, China is flexing its economic muscle on the world stage. It's not just about economics, it's about power, influence, and setting the terms of international trade. The reaction was swift and dramatic. Stock markets in Frankfurt, Paris, and Seoul plunged as investors scrambled to understand the potential fallout. Companies that rely on exports to China are now facing uncertainty and potential losses. For ordinary people, the effects will soon be felt in daily life. Higher prices at the store, worries about job security, and a sense of economic instability are likely to become more common as the situation unfolds. Factories may slow down or shut their doors, workers could face layoffs, and families might have to stretch their budgets even further as the cost of living rises. The world is now watching closely, waiting to see how governments, businesses, and consumers will respond to this unprecedented move. The next steps could reshape the future of global trade for years to come. China's tariff list is a direct hit on Europe's and Korea's economic powerhouses. For Europe, luxury cars, think Mercedes, BMW, Audi, are now twice as expensive, threatening billions in sales and years of brand building. French and Italian luxury goods, from designer handbags to fine wines, are also targeted, putting iconic brands at risk. For Korea, the focus is on high-tech semiconductors, smartphone components, and advanced electronics from giants like Samsung and SK Hynix. These tariffs disrupt global tech supply chains and push China to accelerate its own tech development. Industrial machinery and petrochemicals from Korea are also hit, forcing Chinese manufacturers to look for domestic alternatives. The result? European and Korean companies face devastating losses, cut off from their biggest customer. This is economic warfare with no easy way out. Imagine walking into a Chinese dealership and seeing a European car that once cost $50,000, now priced at a staggering $100,000, all because of a 100% tariff. For most buyers, that price jump is simply out of reach. As a result, sales of European cars in China would collapse almost overnight, leaving showrooms empty and dealers struggling to survive. German factories, many of which were specifically built to serve the booming Chinese market, would suddenly find their order books empty. Production lines would grind to a halt, and thousands of workers across Europe's vast automotive supply chain could face layoffs or reduced hours. The impact would ripple out to parts suppliers, logistics companies, and even local businesses that depend on factory workers' spending. It's not just cars. Luxury goods makers, from fashion houses to watchmakers, would face the same devastating fate. Years of investment in building brands and retail networks in China would suddenly be at risk. as Chinese consumers turn away from European products due to soaring prices. The shockwaves would quickly hit financial markets. Shares in major European companies like Volkswagen, BMW, and LVMH could tumble, wiping billions off their market value and eroding investor confidence. The uncertainty would make global headlines, fueling fears of a broader economic crisis. Pension funds and individual investors, many of whom rely on these stocks for their savings and retirement, would feel the pain as the value of their investments shrinks. For some, years of careful saving could be undermined in a matter of weeks. The uncertainty doesn't stop there. Business leaders, already wary of global instability, would likely freeze new investments, not just in China but around the world. Projects could be delayed or canceled, and expansion plans put on hold, as companies wait to see how the crisis unfolds. The real fear is that this loss of confidence could spread far beyond the factory floor. Business districts might see fewer people, office spaces could remain empty, and the sense of economic unease could touch every corner of European society. These tariffs aren't just about products, they threaten entire industries and the livelihoods of millions of workers. The effects could be long-lasting, making recovery slow and uncertain. As the ripple effects spread, consumer spending could fall, unemployment could rise, and the risk of a wider economic downturn would grow. The social impact could be severe, with more people seeking help and communities struggling to adapt. Europe now faces a crisis that could reshape its economic future for years to come, forcing leaders to make tough decisions and rethink their place in the global economy. South Korea's export-driven economy is deeply tied to China, making these tariffs an existential threat. Semiconductors and display panels from Samsung and SK Hynix are now prohibitively expensive for Chinese buyers. Korean tech firms face plummeting demand, surplus inventory, and slashed production. The financial hit could cripple their ability to innovate, threatening Korea's high-tech edge. The pain spreads to petrochemicals, steel, and machinery, industries that can't easily find new buyers. Factory closures and job losses loom in Korea's industrial heartlands. Korea is caught between its economic reliance on China and its security alliance with the US. The government faces a tough choice: retaliate and risk escalation, or seek compromise and risk appearing weak. The stakes are high. Korea's economic model and strategic position are both on the line. The coming decisions will shape Korea's future in a rapidly changing world. Unlike Europe and Korea, the United States finds itself in a unique position when it comes to China's new tariffs. While many countries are bracing for significant economic impacts, the US is less directly exposed to these measures thanks to a different trade relationship with China that has evolved over recent years. Years of escalating trade disputes and tariff battles have already forced many American companies to rethink their global strategies. As a result, US businesses have shifted large portions of their supply chains away from China, moving manufacturing to countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and other parts of Southeast Asia. This diversification has reduced America's dependence on Chinese factories and made its economy more flexible in the face of new trade barriers. The US economy is now less reliant on Chinese markets, having adapted through a process often called decoupling. American factories have ramped up production at home, and companies have invested in alternative global logistics networks, making them less vulnerable to sudden changes in Chinese policy. When it comes to exports, American products like soybeans remain crucial for China's food security. These agricultural goods are difficult for Beijing to replace, making them less likely to be targeted by Chinese tariffs. This interdependence gives the US a measure of protection that other countries may lack. As a result, China's latest tariff list has been carefully crafted to avoid US goods that are vital to its own economy. Instead, Beijing has focused its retaliatory measures on products from Europe and Korea, which are easier to substitute and less essential to China's immediate needs. This selective targeting gives Washington a strategic advantage. The US can now support its allies in Europe and Korea, offering diplomatic and economic assistance, without suffering the same level of economic shock that those countries might face. In fact, the current crisis may push Europe and Korea even closer to the United States, strengthening long-standing alliances and further isolating China on the global stage. This realignment could have lasting effects on international trade and diplomacy. Of course, the US is not completely immune to the fallout. Economic uncertainty and global market disruptions will still be felt. However, America is better positioned than most to weather this storm, thanks to its diversified supply chains and resilient economy. America's prior experience with trade wars and economic disputes has made it more adaptable and resilient. Businesses and policymakers have learned valuable lessons from past conflicts, allowing them to respond more effectively to new challenges. Now, the United States stands ready to play a pivotal role in shaping the global response to this new phase of trade tensions, leveraging its unique position to influence the future of international commerce. The EU faces a major test. Can it respond to China's tariffs with unity and strength? First, European leaders will push for urgent talks with Beijing, hoping to de-escalate the crisis. If diplomacy fails, the EU may retaliate with its own tariffs, risking a wider trade war. The challenge: respond forcefully without triggering uncontrollable escalation. Europe will also accelerate trade deals with other regions to reduce dependence on China. Closer cooperation with Korea and other affected nations could form a united front at the WTO. Internally, the EU must support industries and workers hit hardest, with financial aid and retraining programs. Protecting social stability is crucial to maintaining resolve. The EU's response will shape its economic and political future. South Korea's government is under pressure to act fast. Diplomats will seek urgent talks with Beijing, stressing the risks of a trade war for both economies. If talks fail, Korea could restrict exports of critical tech components, a risky move that could escalate tensions. More likely, Korea will double down on diversifying trade, investing in Southeast Asia and India to reduce reliance on China. The government will support companies shifting supply chains and finding new markets. Seoul will also turn to the US and Japan for diplomatic and economic support, strengthening regional alliances. Korea's balancing act between China and the US may be ending, with a tilt toward Washington now likely. The choices made now will define Korea's economic resilience and geopolitical role. The world stands at a crossroads. Will this crisis spiral into a global trade war, or can it be contained? One path: tit-for-tat tariffs escalate, disrupting supply chains, raising prices, and risking global recession. Another: skilled diplomacy leads to negotiation, with China easing tariffs in exchange for concessions, restoring stability. A third, likely scenario: a prolonged, tense standoff, with partial tariffs and ongoing uncertainty. Companies adapt to a riskier world, accelerating the split into rival trade blocs. Economic competition could spill into geopolitical rivalry, undermining cooperation on global challenges. This is more than a fight over cars and chips. It's a test of the global order. The decisions made now will determine whether that order survives or fractures. The stakes could not be higher. However this crisis ends, global trade has changed for good. The era of unchecked globalization is over. Economic security and supply chain resilience now take center stage. Europe, Korea, and the US will push for diversification, even at the cost of efficiency. Governments will play a bigger role, using subsidies and industrial policy to secure critical industries. New alliances will form, focused on economic security and shared rules for sensitive technologies. The challenge: defend national interests without sliding into destructive protectionism. The choices made today will shape the global economy for a generation. The world is watching.